Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi Shaked is the founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I'm Lisa Mosbey, and today we're talking about wrongful death cases involving truck accidents and why determining responsibility is not always as simple as identifying the driver behind the wheel. Welcome, Sagi. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Sagi, why is the truck driver not always the only party investigators need to focus on after dealing with a fatal truck accident?
So, when you have one of these fatal accidents or fatal crashes, we often think it's the truck driver, but really the truck driver is really the last link in the chain. What we want to do is not just look for driver error because there's other factors that come into it. Who put that driver on the roadway? Who put that truck on the roadway? Maybe there's something wrong with the truck, or maybe the road, the load was what caused the truck to flip over, or was the truck not ready for those road conditions? So there's different things we want to be looking at. We want to looking at who's the company that made that hiring decision, who trained that driver, is there dispatch pressure, meaning was there pressure from the broker or the dispatcher to get the job or the load to a certain location by a certain time? Did they follow the maintenance rules for repairing that truck with the cargo load? And did they file all the federal safety regulations? So the Federal Motor Carrier has some safety regulations they have to follow. Did they follow all of them? So investigations got to start with all of that. When I get a trucking case, I'm looking at all of those things, not just looking at driver. It has to be more than the driver.
Let's put some identity behind that. Specifically, who, besides the truck driver, can potentially be held responsible after a deadly trucking accident?
So we have to look at one, the driver, we said, two, the trucking company. Now, sometimes it's the trucking company, but you also have a company that has the motor carrier number or the DOT number. They could be on the hook. The company or individual that own the truck, they could be on the hook. Now, depending on the crash, the people who owned or the company that owned the trailer, they could be on the hook. A broker or a logistics company, depending on their control, they could be on the hook. There was just recently, we're in 2026, so about a month ago, there was a United States Supreme Court decision where brokers can be on the hook if they go out and put an unsafe company on the roadway, meaning a lot of times brokers are looking for what is the best way to, or the cheapest way to hire an individual trucking company. So they'll look for price as opposed to safety. So we always want to look at what is the safest company out there, not just, the cheapest, because sometimes the cheapest is expensive. So sometimes the shipper puts unreasonable schedules on the drivers to get to a certain place. So the shipper could be on the hook, the loader, if it was loaded wrong and caused the truck to tip over. A maintenance company, think of not maintaining the truck properly and causing whether a wheel to fly off. I've had that case. I've had, the maintenance company where the brakes weren't working. So that's potentially the person who serviced the brakes or the company that serviced the brakes. Sometimes you have a manufacturer defect. That's, on the manufacturer. So it's not just a trucking case, it's a products liability case. And then in some cases, there's multiple companies, and they're sometimes called what they call a chameleon carrier, where initially you think it's one trucking company, but it's really another truck company behind it because they play games. So it's our job to uncover that and figure out which one of those, and I know I listed a lot of them. That's why you really have to be involved and really know and understand trucking cases so you don't, do an injustice for your client.
And that's a lot of deep pockets that might be involved to make sure that the client is taken care of medically, most importantly. Sagi, how can decisions made by the trucking company itself contribute to liability after a fatal crash?
So think about the trucking company again. We don't want to just think about the driver, but if we think about the trucking company hiring an unsafe driver. I mean, we had a truck crash where sometimes some of the stuff I come across, you just can't believe. The trucking company just hired this guy straight off Craigslist, didn't do any background, let the person drive, and lo and behold, what do you think happens? A large wreck happens. A lot of people get hurt. My client got extremely hurt, but it was all because of the decisions of the trucking company. So they failed to check the driver's safety history. In fact, he didn't even have in their background, which they're supposed to do and keep for up to 3 years. They're supposed to check the driver's safety history. That wasn't done. They're supposed to check, does the driver have any violations? Are there any red flags? Did they train the driver properly? Or is the driver fatigued? We have a case right now with sleep apnea. Do they do anything to look into that? You have a person who is driving always tired. Is That's on the trucking company to do their due diligence. They're putting, yes, they're making products move, but you got to do it safely because more than 4,000 people die a year on the roadway from truck accidents. So there's something in the industry that's going on that needs to change. Are they monitoring their hours of service? So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, which are the laws in place, they give standards of times that drivers are allowed to be on the road. So do they violate those hours of service? And if they are violating those hours of service, trucking company, what are you doing about that? Are the truck drivers in failing to inspect the trucks before they get on the roadway? They're supposed to inspect every 150 miles. I can tell you almost in every case I've handled in the last 26 years, this is 2026, I haven't seen a trucking company that does that properly. They just don't. Are their vehicles safe? Are they putting unsafe vehicles on the roadway? We had a trucking company where the truck driver complained to them, hey, these brakes are not good enough for the type of load that I have. You need to change the brakes. And that was ignored by the trucking company. So if they're having mechanical issues, they need to address that. And then sometimes you have a company culture. We hear that a lot, right? Culture. But what is their culture? Is their culture to put profits over safety and just get the load to where it needs to go without putting safety at the forefront, the safe, making sure the driver is safe, but that the driver can drive safe too and keep everybody on the road safe? Because that's what we all want. I want to get to point A to point B without getting hit by a car or a truck. So it's important and it's incumbent upon these trucking companies to do their job and follow the law. So they can fall into many of those things, as I mentioned, that could be problematic for them. And I have a book coming out that addresses that and gives people the A to Z on how to take a case from initial phone call all the way to a trial. So that's coming up. It's called Road to Recovery, and hopefully in the next month or two, it'll be out.
Excellent. Can you share an example of a wrongful death truck accident case where the investigation uncovered more responsible parties than the family originally realized?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, I mean, we have one going on right now where it's a horrific case where our client was on the roadway. They were actually on the roadway repairing, not repairing, but cleaning up what just happened on the roadway, which was another crash. And as they're finishing that road work and they're sitting in the car, and we have this video from the highway, and you can see this 18 wheeler is barreling down the roadway and just creams this truck. One person dies and another sustains horrific injuries. And they had what you call an arrow board where you can see the arrow says move to the next lane, and they put the roadway signs out properly. But this guy just fell asleep on the roadway and smashed right into our client, killing one of them and really injuring the other. And so what do you do? The trucking company, unfortunately, has only $1 million in coverage. Where do you look to next? In that case, we know from that specific investigation we did that the driver has fatigue issues. So we have a trucking company, but they only had 1 million. So now we're going after the broker in that case who knew this trucking company was putting out fatigue drivers just to get the loads. in place from one to another. So that's another avenue where you can look to make a recovery for the family when you have one of these cases. It's not just the trucking company. There's other avenues to look at. And in that case, it was a broker. And we're still going after that broker right now.
This is just a little bit of an aside, but do these companies actually look at medical records for their drivers? Like if they have fatigue issues or high blood sugar issues or other things that could impede their vision, their hearing, their response time? Does it factor into to these commercial vehicle drivers getting hired, or do they overlook it most often?
So they should. And every 2 years, they have to get clearance, sort of like someone who flies a plane, they have to get clearance. So every 2 years, they have to go and get clearance by a doctor or a physician's assistant. And usually there's clinics that they'll set up to, but a lot of they'll set up to get them the exam. But a lot of times those clinics are like rubber stamps and they don't take a deep dive into what's really going on. So we've had cases where the individual had two jobs. They were driving and they had another job, like a side hustle. The problem is when you're a truck driver, you're not allowed to have another job because when you're supposed to be resting, you're supposed to be resting. You're not supposed to be doing another job because then that'll take effect on your hours of service and that can impact a person's ability to react and perceive stuff, but also fatigue. It really wears on you when you're driving all that time and then you got another job. So that's why they have those hours of service. So they should, in a perfect world, they would get a true honest assessment of what the person is like because think about it, you're putting as a trucking company, you're putting 80,000 pounds of trust into somebody that they're not going to crash into someone, not destroy a whole family. We've seen that happen. The whole family gets destroyed or killed because of a trucking company's negligence and the driver's negligence. So they've got to be more on top of it and do their due diligence so they don't put dangerous drivers on the roadway. And we wouldn't have 4,000 people dying a year in the United States.
Siggy, I kind of want to jump a little deeper into or dive a little deeper into some of these details. How do lawyers determine whether responsibility extends beyond the driver who caused the crash? Like, is there a process of elimination that you actually walk through when you're reviewing these cases?
Yeah, so first things first, every trucking case, and I say this in my book, it all starts off with your preservation of evidence. Because if you lose evidence, you lose the ability to determine who specifically else is at fault. So we start with preserving the evidence immediately. That means sending out what they call your preservation letters or your spoliation letters. You hope they don't spoil the evidence or destroy the evidence, but we want to get the data from the black box data. We want to get the videos if they have any. We want to get the inspection records. We want to get their hours of service records, everything. We want to get their employment file because they only have to keep it, the trucking companies, for a certain amount of time. So if we preserve it, now they have to keep it. And we want to know, going back to that case I just talked about where they put a driver on the roadway without looking into their background. The only reason we knew that because we asked for their driver qualification file, which is something they have to save, a trucking company, and they didn't have it for this driver, which means they just put a guy they found on Craigslist and put that driver on the roadway. Very dangerous. I mean, we're trusting people when we get on that roadway. You get on a highway or a roadway, you're hoping that this company followed the law and did the right thing. Sort of like you get on an airplane. You're hoping, whether it's American Airlines or any company, that they did their background on that specific pilot because we're trusting them blindly. People get on a bus and they trust their bus driver blindly. Same thing, we get on the road and we're trusting people blindly that these trucking companies are following the law. Did they do the background on that driver? Are they teaching the driver on their safety policies if they have any? Did the trucking company have a maintenance history that they're following? Are you obtaining the black box data to make sure you're keeping them honest? Those are things we want to keep in mind when we're doing one of these cases. Again, preservation, 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 so you can determine who's at fault, not just the driver. Those inspections that we do of the truck, extremely important. I mean, we found stuff in trucks that you wouldn't believe in some of these cases. I mean, one guy had 3 stands, one for his iPad, one for his laptop, one for his phone, and he's driving. And so we were able to do a forensic analysis on all of them. And sure enough, this guy's watching a movie while he's driving 80,000 pounds. And of course, what do you think happens? He gets into a crash. So these preservation letters make a difference. The inspections make a difference. And again, sometimes you don't know. The police report doesn't tell the whole story. It just tells you who the trucking company is at that time, but maybe they're going under someone else's motor carrier number. How did they hire that load? What came about to hire that specific company? If you're the broker, if you're going after the broker, what was in mind? Did you have bids? Why did you choose the company that's the least has the least safety rating? Those are things you won't find out unless you send out your preservation letters, not only to the trucking company, but to the federal motor carrier uh, safety regulations, where they have the safety regulations, that department that keeps that, you want to make sure you're sending it to them. It's a Freedom of Information Act request. And you want to make sure they preserve the data too, because their data gets lost in the shuffle as well. So there's a lot to do at the beginning of these cases to really understand who's at fault.
I can feel my jaw tightening up as you're saying these things and how people are just disregarding other lives on the road. It's just I don't know how you do this every day, but I thank you. There needs to be somebody out there who's representing those of us on the roadway. But when there's disputes and there's so many different parties involved in these kinds of accidents, and if there's people pointing fingers this way, and the different companies are pointing fingers at each other, how do you deal with those disputes to get through and get a clear picture of who we should pursue for damages?
It's a great question. So a lot of times you don't know when the truck crash occurs. You're just getting that phone call. You have no idea. So it'll all go back to what investigation have you done? What documents and specific items have you preserved? Did you work with your accident reconstruction expert? I mean, sometimes it's easy. You have a rear ender, you know the trucking company's at fault, but who else is involved in that? Was it a brake failure? Is the manufacturer on the hook? Or did their automatic emergency braking system not work? Depending on how fast the crash occurred. We have a case right now where the automatic emergency braking system failed in a relatively low speed type of impact where it should have worked. And just let me just put this out there. Automatic emergency braking system is a software that's installed in cars and trucks, relatively newer cars and trucks, since 2018. And it the software detects if there's a car in front of you and it's supposed to stop your vehicle. So if you're driving a relatively new vehicle, you would feel that vehicle coming to a halt because the software is supposed to protect us. Because sometimes human beings make mistakes, they get distracted, they're looking at their phone, or the text comes in, or if you're an Uber driver, you just get distracted by the pings. That will avoid human error, and it's supposed to work. That's what they sell, that's what they promote. So if you have a case like an AEB system failure, an automatic emergency braking system failure, that's a software failure. So that can happen, but you wouldn't know that unless you do the investigation right away. So there could be multiple companies that cause the event, whether again it's a broker, a shipper, um, trucking company, another motor carrier, the company that hired to maintain or do the maintenance on the truck. You wouldn't know it unless you send out your preservation letters and do your inspections and get your experts on board. Because the goal is to get justice for our clients and ensure that this just doesn't happen again.
Very good. Last question here, and it's kind of a recap of everything that you've already shared. How can finding additional responsible parties change the direction of a wrongful death case once the investigation is underway?
Yeah, it can completely change the case if you find. So, for example, go back to that case where the roadway. If we just limit it to the trucking company, we would be stopped. And yes, it would be $1 million, but that's not much when you have someone who's really badly injured and someone who lost their life from it. So we want to look at every different aspect of the trucking company. Where were they in the chain of safety failures, right? What happened from what decision makers at the trucking company made from putting this driver on the roadway to putting that truck on the roadway? It's our job as attorneys to find that additional insurance coverage to help that family to heal from what they went through. Now, money doesn't do it, but getting justice does do it. And we have to put him to task. If you're going to be a danger on the roadway, we have to make sure you no longer can drive. And, doing that works with, the government as well. So we have to help them by sort of, we're the police, the civil police, basically. If we don't do it, no one else will do it. So that's why you have, personal injury lawyers who can help people who are victims in these horrific wrecks. So our job is to explore and find out who else can we recover from to get our clients justice. Why did this happen to them? And who had the power to prevent it? That's really what I'm looking for in these cases. Could this have been prevented? If so, why wasn't it prevented? And why did it happen?
Well said. I want to thank you for your time today and walking us through such a broad scope of these wrongful death cases and how they occur. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for today's episode of Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents. If you'd like to learn more about Sagi Shaked and his work at Shaked Law, personal injury lawyers, visit shakedlaw.com. You'll find resources to help you understand your rights after a serious trucking accident and what it takes to protect your future. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.